Okay, hi everybody. I'm very excited today. In an ideal world, I would have loved to actually be delivering this lecture with the video capability. I know that Elon uh, has stated that the video option for X Spaces should be available soon. I think that would be really helpful because then I can actually show some diagrams that are important to show as I try to explain some of these concepts. In the meantime, what I've done is if you go to the thread where I posted the the alert that there'll be an X Spaces today, I posted 3 screenshots of 3 nomological networks of cumulative evidence that I constructed, part of my 2017 paper. Let me just read for you the title. It's the title of the paper is on the method of evolutionary psychology and its applicability to consumer research. It's published in a Journal of Marketing Research, which is one of the truly uh, top A+ journals in the field. It's June 2017, pages 464 to 477. And what I've done is shown you figures 2, 3, and 4, and I'll get into all that. So what are nomological networks of cumulative evidence? We'll get into all that in a second. And some of you who follow my work have probably heard me talk about this. And this is something that not only did I discuss in the paper that I just cited, my 2017 paper, but in chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind. The chapter is on how to seek truth. I go into great detail about this epistemological tool. And again, I can almost think of nothing that is more important epistemologically than for me to lecture about this, because it is a incredibly powerful technique for amassing evidence in support of a position that you are taking. Before I do that, let me step back a bit. So, in science, or in just generally when we're talking about truth, we can break up truth into different uh, classifications of truth. So, for example, a mathematical truth or an axiomatic truth is different from an empirical truth. So, uh, mathematical proof or truth would be, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Is that a true statement or not? In axiomatic truth, let's say when you talk about rational choice theory, you might say, if I prefer car A to car B and I prefer car B to car C, it must be that I prefer car A to car C. That's called the transitivity axiom, and therefore that has to be true. In mathematical logic, we talk about, say, a syllogism, right? So, for example, all humans are whatever, are all dogs are mammals, humans are mammals, therefore, right? So you can set up a if-then set of premises, and depending on certain Boolean parameters, Boolean operators, the AND operator, the OR operator, you can determine whether that statement is true or false. So in that case, it's a binary system where, given a set of premises, does the conclusion follow? So there are all sorts of ways by which we can establish whether something is true, axiomatically true, logically true, mathematically true. But today what I'd like to talk about are empirical truth. In other words, this is where you have to amass empirical evidence that suggests that, well, there really seems to be an abundance of data that supports this position. Okay. Now, the way that I came to think in this manner is in my evolutionary work, where I'm trying to, say, argue for a particular position, and demonstrating that, let's say, a phenomenon is indeed an evolutionary adaptation. Well, how would I go about constructing an argument that makes it rather unassailable and incontrovertible that the position that I'm taking seems to be the veridical one? And so Darwin himself, when he was amassing the evidence in support of the theory of evolution, amassed data from a bewildering number of fields. So it wasn't as though, he ran data with a study with butterflies and came to his conclusion. There was paleontological data, there was comparative anatomical data, there was ecology data, there was biodiversity data, there was geology data, there was data from a broad range of disciplines, all of which, when triangulated, made it quite apparent that he was espousing a theory that till today has not been falsified. But of course, he didn't call it nomological networks of cumulative evidence. Nomological networks of cumulative evidence, the term nomological networks, there are several contexts where it arises, but in when you're developing a psychometric test, let's say you want to measure a particular personality trait, how do you go about ensuring that the scale that you've developed measures exactly what you're purporting that it measures and nothing else? Well, there are several psychologists in the 50s, Campbell and Fiske, Cronbach and Meehl, who argued that there are ways by which you can triangulate many sources of evidence. So, for example, in the multi-trait, multi-method approach, you're exactly doing that. You're using a triangulation of multiple measurements that demonstrate that which you are stating you're measuring must be exactly that. So you take this principle and now you want to apply it to all sorts of other things. So, for example, in the 3 figures that I've given you, so hopefully if you're able to access them, they're, as I said, they're in the thread of the call for today's X Spaces. Figure 2 is a nomological network of cumulative evidence arguing that the sex specificity of toy preferences have a biological root. So if I wanted to demonstrate that no, it's not true that toy preferences are simply due to social construction, how would I go about demonstrating that to you? So if you look at that figure, I've got data. So if you look, so in the center of the figure, there is the biological roots of toy preferences. And now what I'm going to do is collect data from across cultures, across species, across time periods, across methodologies, across theoretical frameworks, all of which triangulate in demonstrating that the phenomenon that I'm purporting to hold true holds true for the exact reasons that I'm saying it holds true. So let's go through this. And I'll describe this example. This is one that some of you may have heard me mention in the past. And then I want to read something to you from chapter 7 in the parasitic mind. So bear with me. It might seem like I'm all over the place, but it will all come together. So social constructivists tell us that no. The reason why John likes to play with blue trucks and Cindy likes to play with pink dolls is because, mommy and daddy are just promulgating the gender role sexist stereotypes. But if only you were to reverse those, then suddenly boys would want to play with little dolls and girls would want to play with, with trucks and guns. Okay, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, how can I show you that? Okay, so now I'm going to build you a nomological network that will make it incontrovertible that they are not due to social construction. Let's start. So I can get you data from developmental psychology that demonstrates that sex-type toy preferences are already documented in infants who are too young to yet be socialized. In other words, by definition, their toy preferences could not have been due to social construction because they haven't reached the developmental stage that would allow them to be socialized. So already just that piece of evidence is a death nail, is a death blow to the social constructivist argument. But that's the beauty of a nomological network of cumulative evidence. I don't stop there. So, and by the way, if you want the references to all of the studies that I'm mentioning, that's why I included those. Usually it would cost a lot of money, by the way, for you to go and actually access that paper. So all I've done is taken 3 screenshots to allow you to follow the figure. So first line of evidence, comes from developmental psychology. Next one comes from morphological studies. So let me just read you what my figure says here. In preschool boys, more masculinized digit ratios, bear with me, I'll explain what that means, correlate to more masculinized play behaviors and toy preferences. So there's something in evolutionary theory that's called the 2D 4D ratio. This is the ratio of your index finger to your ring finger. Now that's a sexually dimorphic trait, meaning that in girls, those two fingers are roughly the same length. In boys, the ring finger is much longer than the index finger. So that's what we mean by a sexually dimorphic trait. And the more you've been exposed to testosterone in utero, the more that that difference between the 2D, 4D is. Meaning that that morphological trait is correlated to a endocrinological marker, in this case, testosterone in utero. Well, it turns out that boys who've got more masculinized digit ratios are more likely to have masculinized play behaviors and toy preferences. Now, that's a pretty incredible finding. So, right now, I've given you data from developmental psychology. I've given you data from morphological and endocrinological studies. Now, let's go on to pediatric endocrinology. Okay? So this is from medicine, specifically from pediatrics, more specifically from pediatric endocrinology, right? There is so let me just read it and then I'll come back. Testosterone levels of infant boys and girls collected from 7 days old to 6 months of age correlate with the expected sex-specific toy preferences and play patterns. Now that's astonishing, right? So if you take testosterone levels of little boys and girls, we're talking from who are 7 days old to 6 months of age, the higher the testosterone level, the more the sex-specific, so for example, if it's higher testosterone level, then the play behavior is going to be, and the toy preferences will be more masculinized. Let's keep going. I can get you data from around the world, because you might say, oh, but those toy preferences it's just a Western construct. Okay, well, how about this? I can get you non-Western data. So following extensive analysis of dolls and doll play among peoples of Saharan and North African regions, mainly girls play with dolls, and female dolls are much more common than their male counterparts. This was done by a French anthropologist, and the number of non-Western societies that we're studying is quite bewildering. So it can't be due to it's a Western construct. So you see how I am tightening the epistemological noose around the social constructivists. So far, I've gotten you data from developmental psychology, from morphology and endocrinology, from pediatric endocrinology, from non-Western anthropological studies. But let's keep going. How about you say, oh, but that doesn't prove that it's biological. That doesn't prove that it's evolutionary. Okay, well, here we come. Here we come with cross-species studies. I can show you that vervet monkeys, rhesus monkeys, and chimpanzees, our close primate cousins, exhibit the same sex-specific toy preferences that human infants exhibit. Oh boy, it's not looking good for the social scientist bullshitters, is it? Let's keep going. Oh, but Professor Saad, this is a contemporary thing. Maybe in the past the toy preferences were reversed. Oh no, I got data for you. I can get you data from classics and so by classics it means ancient Greece. Analysis of depiction of children in funerary monuments from ancient Greece reveals that boys were shown with toys with wheels while girls were depicted with dolls. So now I've gotten you cross-era data showing you that the exact same toy preferences occurred back then as they do today. Okay, 2 more sets of lines of evidence. From clinical endocrinology, you ready? You're focused? I should be charging you $5,000 for this lecture. Girls afflicted with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is an endocrinological disorder that masculinizes their morphology, that masculinizes their behavioral patterns. Girls who suffer from congenital adrenal hyperplasia are more likely to exhibit toy preferences that are akin to those of, come on, let me hear you say it, of boys. Meaning that once there's an endocrinological malady that masculinizes the behaviors of little girls, suddenly their toy preferences switch. And finally, I'm going to get you cross-cultural data to test the socialization argument for toy preferences. So Sweden, by the way, scores the highest on gender equality, meaning that Sweden is the country that is of the countries that have been studied. This is from Hofstede. Of all the countries that have been studied, I think it's roughly 50 or 51 or 52 countries. Sweden is the one that has sort of the most gender neutral or the most non-gender role specialization scores, because Sweden has gone through a social engineering experiment where for many decades they've tried to eradicate those gender roles, right? Because, they're so progressive in Sweden. Well, so Sweden has had 40, 50 years to eradicate. If it's due to socialization, that why boys prefer certain toys and girls prefer certain other toys, then after 40 or 50 years of reverse socialization, we should see that the toy preferences in Sweden might not be akin to what's been found anywhere else. Well, you ready for this? Nelson, in 2005, inventoried 40,673 and 40,891 toys in Swedish girls' and boys' rooms, respectively, and found the exact same sex-specific toy preferences. This is not running a study with 40 undergrads in your undergraduate class. These are in the 40,000s of actual toys that little boys and little girls play with in Sweden, and the exact same pattern, sex-specific pattern, was found, even though Sweden has gone through a massive gender role eradication program for 40, 50 years. So look how many data I've gotten you. Developmental data from psychology, morphological data, endocrinological data, pediatric endocrinological data, cross-cultural anthropological data, comparative data across species, clinical endocrinological data, cross-cultural data from Sweden to rule out the socialization argument, and finally, classics data, historical data from 2,000 plus years ago from ancient Greece. So what have I done? I've amassed data across cultures, across time periods, across species, across methodologies, across dependent measures, across theoretical frameworks, across procedures, all of which point to the exact same conclusion. That's the power of nomological networks. Now, how do you construct such a network? That's the hard part, because what you have to do here, this is not some literature review on steroids, as I explained in the Parasitic Mind. A literature review is much more narrow. Okay, a literature review in a scientific study is basically summarizing what's been done in the very narrow area that you are studying by people in the past. So, for example, if I'm studying, does coffee consumption alleviate asthma symptoms? Okay, well, I'd like to do a study, but there have been other people that have done those studies. And, some have found this, some have found that. And so the literature review in this case is very narrow. It is looking at what has been previously done on the specific relationship between coffee consumption and asthma. Okay. Now, so that's one type of sort of review, if you want, the classic literature review. Now, how is that different from a meta-analysis? Some of you have heard that term in science. A meta-analysis is where you take a whole bunch of studies that have been done on that exact topic, and you want to know, so what's the bottom line? What is the net effect? If we were to take a snapshot of all those studies, can we conclude anything? So let's say 40 studies have been done on the link between coffee consumption and asthma symptoms. 20 have found that it alleviates asthma consumption symptoms. 10 studies have found there is no relationship. Another 10 studies have found the other way. How can we put all those studies together and come up with one final metric? Well, that's what a meta-analysis does. A meta-analysis takes a bunch of studies using some inclusion or exclusion criteria to say whether all these studies are, comparing apples to apples, or whether you can't compare them. So, for example, if some of the studies are being done on kids who are less than 10 years old, while other studies are being done on adults, well, maybe you don't want to mix those two sets of studies because the respiratory system of a 10-year-old might be different from that of an adult, and so therefore I want to only restrict my meta-analysis to adults. So a meta-analysis is a statistical means of aggregating many studies together so that we could come up with one final net effect. Does drinking coffee alleviate asthma symptoms? Okay, and it's a very, very powerful tool to use. But both literature review and both meta-analysis are nothing compared to what I'm proposing here when I'm talking about nomological networks of cumulative evidence. Because nomological networks of cumulative evidence require a completely different, if you like, thought process. You have to say to yourself, what would be the entire universe of possible data that I could amass to convince my staunchest detractor? And that's why you start thinking, okay, well, can I get data from across disciplines? Can I get data that rules out socialization? Can I get data across species? Can I get data across cultures and so on? So it's a way of thinking that doesn't come naturally. It's not easy to just come up with what should be the boxes that you include in the nomological network. Okay? And so one of the things that I'm thinking of doing next is there a way to automatize that process so that you can kind of create, and I have another paper that I published in 2020 whereby I argue, can we create, if you like, a Wikipedia of nomological networks, like a repository of nomological networks. You want to know what is the adaptive argument for menstrual cycle effects in women? Well, I can build you a nomological network that will, argue whatever point I'm trying to argue. Okay, so that will be an incredibly powerful epistemology to have. Right now, you have to manually, right? So I have to sit there and say, okay, how can I construct such a nomological network? So what I've done in the 3 diagrams that I shared with you guys is I've given you a nomological network for the biological roots of toy preferences, which I just went through in great details. I've also given you a nomological network, this is figure 3, of men's evolved preference for the hourglass figure in women. In other words, if you look around the world, men tend to prefer, as their preferred body shape of a woman, the hourglass figure. And so if I wanted to prove to you that hourglass figure is not due to social construction, it's not because we learned it in Vogue magazine. It's actually the exact opposite. It exists in this form in Vogue magazine because it caters to men's evolved preferences. And so if I wanted to demonstrate to you the evolutionary and biological roots of the adaptive reason for the hourglass figure, how would I go about doing that? And you know what? Let me actually go through it. I'm going to go through that figure in details. You ready? So I can get you medical data that demonstrates that the hourglass figure has been shown to be a reliable cue of fertility and health, which is a very direct evolutionary argument, right? In other words, a woman that has the body of a male swimmer simply doesn't have the right fertility cues that you would typically be desiring as a man, right? In other words, there are fertility related reasons, and health-related reasons why we are attracted to the hourglass figure. So when you say these hips look like they can bear a child healthily, well, that's exactly what the evidence suggests. So I can get you medical data that suggests that this link holds true, evolutionarily speaking. I can get you theoretical data that demonstrates that sexual selection yields mate preferences that confer reproductive advantage. So, for example, sexual selection basically is the mechanism that explains why species evolve certain traits, not for survival reasons, but for mating advantage reasons, right? So the peacock's tail did not evolve because it confers a survival advantage to the peacock, but rather because it signals, hey, I've got this big tail, I'm still around, despite the fact that it makes it harder for me to avoid predators. Then this is an honest signal of my phenotypic quality, so you should choose me as a likely mate, right? And so these morphological preferences evolve precisely via the mechanism of sexual selection. So that's theoretical argument stemming from evolutionary theory as to why men and women have each evolved preference for certain traits. All other things equal, women are not attracted to a man that has a pear-shaped body. They're attracted to men that look like male Olympic swimmers. And there is a reason for that, an evolutionary reason. And no culture has ever been found where that doesn't hold true. Okay, let's go on. I can get you psychological data. So the hourglass penchant has been elicited via multiple methods: paper and pencil tasks, eye tracking, brain imaging, and multiple stimuli, including photos of cosmetic surgeries and line drawings. In other words, I can show you a wide range of types of stimuli, and men will always elicit or exhibit the preference to the hourglass figure. I can show you data, cross-temporal data, from an analysis of Playboy centerfolds and Miss America winners spanning several decades that suggest that the same hourglass figure is always depicted. Now, the weight of the women might change, right? So, for example, I've often been asked, well, how come but the Rubenesque painting, the women were much more rotund than the thinner models of today? That's true. But what you don't realize is that that's not what matters. What matters is that both the thin model and the heavier Rubenesque woman depicted in the paintings are exhibiting the hourglass figure. I can get you cross-cultural data showing you that the hourglass figure has been established in widely different racial populations and cultures. In other words, it's not African Americans that love hourglass figure, but not Japanese people. Irrespective of the race of the women that are being evaluated, and irrespective of the race of the men who are doing the evaluating, you have the universal preference for the hourglass figure. I can get you data, now look at this one, cross-cultural and cross-temporal. The hourglass figure has been found in an analysis of 286 Egyptian, African, Greco-Roman, and Indian sculptures and statuettes going back several millennia, and 155 prehistoric Jomon figurines, meaning that across different art traditions spanning several millennia, the depiction of female beauty is always depicted with the hourglass figure. I can get you data, as this is actually one of my studies that I published in 2008, where I did a content analysis across 48 countries looking at the measurements that women advertise when they advertise themselves as online escorts all over the internet. And guess what? That's exactly what you find across the 48 societies. It's the hourglass figure. So the hourglass figure is basically a waist-to-hip ratio of 0.68 to 0.72. And that's exactly what I found in that study. Also, women who have the hourglass figure end up receiving higher paid fees. In other words, there is a price premium on going with an escort who has the hourglass figure. I can also, now this is the one that blows people's mind. I think I might have mentioned that study uh, in one of my earlier Joe Rogan episodes. You ready for this? This is mind-blowing. Congenitally blind men exhibit the hourglass preference via touch. Did you hear what I just said? So one of the things that the social constructivists will argue is, oh, you can't rule out that men all over the world, across all time periods, just by magic, were all coincidentally taught to prefer the hourglass figure. Well, you see, I apparently learned to be attracted to a body type that Beyonce has and to be attracted to her more than I'm attracted to a lawnmower because that's what I saw in Hollywood media images. If only Hollywood media images had told me to be attracted to trees or squirrels or lawnmowers, that's what I would have been attracted to. No, no, no. Congenitally blind men, meaning we are taking a population for our study that by definition rules out the socialization possibility. They've never seen media images. They've never seen rap videos. They've never seen Hollywood images. Yet haptically, through touch, they prefer the mannequin that exhibits the hourglass figure. So look how many data I've gotten you. I've gotten you medical data. I've gotten you global online escort data. I've gotten you data from several millennia across many different art traditions, across cultures. I've gotten you data from blind men. I've gotten you psychological data. I've gotten you data from Playboy centerfolds and from Miss America winners. I've gotten you data from across races, around the world, across ethnic groups, and it all points to the hourglass figure. That's the power of building nomological networks. One of the reasons why I don't get canceled is precisely because when I take positions, I've done my homework. Therefore, when I come prepared with a gigantic bazooka called I've already built my nomological network of cumulative evidence for whatever it is that I'm arguing. Therefore, if you want to debate me, good luck to you. Because I can assure you that you haven't built your nomological network for your bullshit position. That's why I can walk into rooms with hostile audience members. And believe me, they shut their mouth and put their head down. Why? Because I've done my homework. Now, when I don't know what I'm talking about, if you ask me, as I've explained before, hey, what is the net effect on the legalization of cannabis in Canada? You know what I'm going to say? Hey, that's a great question, but it's above my pay grade. I don't really know the answer to that. What I'm effectively telling you is I haven't built the requisite nomological network that would allow me to answer you in an incontrovertible manner. So one of the beauties of knowing how to build these nomological networks is that you end up having epistemic humility because I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And so I'm very well calibrated. And therefore, so you can't catch me in half truths and lies and trying to wing it and try to phoning it in because I exactly know what I know and what I don't know. Okay? I won't go through the third one here. I added a third one. This is one where a third nomological network where I demonstrate the biological and evolutionary roots of loss aversion. Loss aversion is a cognitive bias whereby for a given amount of, let's say, money, people are much more worried about losing $100 than about gaining $100. In other words, the pain of losing is about 2 times greater. That's an estimate than the pleasure of gaining an equivalent amount. In other words, we tend to be risk seekers in our desires to minimize losses, and we are more risk averse when it comes to the gain region of the curve. That's precisely what Kahneman and Tversky did in their prospect theory, right? Remember, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2002 in economics for his work. The only reason that his partner Tversky didn't win it with him is because Regrettably, he had passed away in 1996, so you can't get it posthumously. And so I wanted to demonstrate in this third nomological network that loss aversion is something that is baked into our evolutionary DNA. In other words, that cognitive bias doesn't just arise through magic or socialization or learning. There are very clear biological and evolutionary reasons why the loss aversion bias exists. And I provide developmental data, genomic analysis data, behavioral genetics data, cross-cultural data, theoretical data, mathematical modeling data, neuroscientific data, and comparative data across species to make my point. So hopefully you're starting to understand the power, the epistemological power that you gain in building these nomological networks. It basically turns you into a world champion debater, because you can go into any setting with the most hostile people, and as long as the nomological network that you've built is tight. Now, by the way, of course, there's a very important point to be made here. In building your nomological network, you have to be an honest purveyor of the data that you are amassing, right? If in the process of building your nomological network, you come across data that does not support your position, that has to be built into the network so that the totality of the data might still support overwhelmingly your position. But you certainly should not be selective, right? So you don't look for all of the evidence that supports your position and somehow ignore that which doesn't support it. But if your position is one that is truly veridical, then it should be a no-brainer. In other words, all of the triangulation of lines of evidence should be in support of your data. But now, I'm going to end today by something that I raised in chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind. The chapter is titled How to Seek Truth, Nomological Networks of Cumulative Evidence. But then, as I start that chapter, I give people a somewhat pessimistic warning. And let me read you that passage. So this starts on page 141, and I'm going to read on to page 142. Let me just read it straight out, and then I'll link it back to the discussion on nomological networks. Okay, so this is at the bottom of page 141. Along with two of his co-authors, Leon Festinger, the pioneer of the theory of cognitive dissonance, reminded us more than 6 decades ago about the difficulty of getting someone to change his mind. And so now I'm going to read you a quote. You ready? This quote is absolutely unbelievable. So here we go. So this is from Leon Festinger et al. A man with a conviction is a hard man to change. Tell him you disagree and he turns away. Show him facts or figures and he questions your sources. Appeal to logic and he fails to see your point. We have all experienced the futility of trying to change a strong conviction, especially if the convinced person has some investment in his belief. We are familiar with the variety of ingenious defenses with which people protect their convictions, managing to keep them unscathed through the most devastating attacks. But man's resourcefulness goes beyond simply protecting a belief. Suppose an individual believes something with his whole heart. Suppose further he has a commitment to this belief, that he has taken irrevocable actions because of it. Finally, suppose that he is presented with evidence, unequivocal and undeniable evidence that his belief is wrong. What will happen? The individual will frequently emerge not only unshaken, but even more convinced of the truth of his beliefs than ever before. Indeed, he may even show a new fervor about convincing and converting other people to his view. Close quote. I hope you understand why I led off with that quote in the chapter on seeking truth, because I'm offering a mind vaccine. I'm offering an epistemological tool to demonstrate that a position is true But that only applies if your interlocutor is open to listening honestly to your evidence. If they're not, if they go la la la, I don't want to hear it, or if any amount of evidence will be, you know, the person will be unshakable in their willingness to alter their position, then no amount of evidence, no nomological network that I could ever build you can change your opinion, right? So this is why, if I can go on, I'm going to read another oh, by the way, before I go on, if some of you might remember that I was recently asked on a podcast that was hosted by a British host, what is the singular most surprising evidence or piece, phenomenon in human behavior that I have found in my 30 plus years as a behavioral scientist, as an evolutionary psychologist, and as a professor. And I stopped for a minute, I thought, and then I said, well, it's probably the inability of most people to change their opinions, irrespective of the amount of evidence that I show them. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. So now why is that? You may say, okay, so I've given you the epistemological mind vaccine. It's called Nomological Networks of Cumulative Evidence. But I've also told you that most people are unwilling to be honest interlocutors when it comes to that process. So why is that? So here I'm going to read you just one more paragraph on page 142 of The Parasitic Mind. By the way, I highly recommend, if you haven't bought a copy, to do so. I highly recommend that you gift it to other people. This is not because I stand to make $3 of royalties from your purchase. It's because it really is the mind vaccine for the lunacy. I mean, that's why the book has been so successful. So more than anything, I want people to be able to think properly. And with all due modesty, my book is that mind vaccine. So hurry and order your copy. So let me just read one more paragraph. So now the paragraph basically here that I'm reading is to offer an evolutionary explanation for why most people are not willing to be honest purveyors of the truth. So more recently, Dan Sperber and Hugo Mercier, by the way, who's been on my show, developed their argumentative theory of reasoning, which speaks to the fact that it might be difficult for people to alter their opinions even when faced with contrary evidence. They posit that our reasoning faculties did not necessarily evolve to seek truth, but rather to convince ourselves and others in a battle of wits. Given the apparent innate penchant for most people to engage in motivated reasoning, meaning biased information processing to protect one's beliefs, attitudes, or ideological positions, is it feasible to expect people to seek an objective truth? As an optimistic realist, I'd like to think so. So basically, what I wanted to do there is say, look, I have given you the epistemological mind vaccine in seeking truth and in building unassailable arguments. But that mind vaccine only works as long as your opponent is willing to be an honest interlocutor. And if yes, then you can flip them, you could convince them. If no, then no amount of mind vaccines could ever, alter their positions. So there you have it, folks. So to summarize, nomological networks of cumulative evidence are not just a big literature review. They're much more than that. They're not a meta-analysis. They're much more than that. They are basically an epistemological tool that says what would be all possible data in the universe that I can collect and present to you to demonstrate the veracity of my position, of my argument. And if you're able to do that, my goodness, do you have an unbelievable epistemological weapon in your toolbox. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe my next X Spaces will be to turn this nomological network of cumulative evidence to other contexts. By the way, you don't need to apply this only for evolutionary arguments, right? The three examples that I gave you for nomological networks were the sex specificity of toy preferences, the evolutionary roots of the hourglass figure preference, and the evolutionary and biological roots of loss aversion. But it doesn't have to be only for, evolutionary phenomena. So in the next X spaces, maybe, what I'll be doing is demonstrating how you can build a nomological network of cumulative evidence to answer the question, is religion X a peaceful one? And I'll leave it to you to decide what X might be, which religion I might turn my weaponry toward. There you have it, folks. I discuss all this, as I said, in Chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please consider supporting my work in one of several ways. Of course, buy The Parasitic Mind, buy The Saad Truth About Happiness, which is a fantastic and optimistic and positive and fun book. Subscribe to my exclusive content. It literally, I just spend right now 45 minutes. If you were taking this course with me, you'd be spending thousands of dollars to take it. You've gotten it for free. Don't be a social parasite. Reciprocate. Reciprocity is a Darwinian mechanism. You take something, I give something in return. So do the right thing. Support not just me, anybody who you love what they're doing. Don't just free ride. Support their work. They're providing you their time, their expertise, their knowledge, their wisdom, their humor. That should be monetized. So please consider doing so. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be posting this subsequently on my platforms. So in case someone missed this, they can certainly just listen to it on X, or they can go to my YouTube channel or my podcast and listen to it probably tomorrow. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope it was time well spent. Cheers, everybody.